It was the mother of all by-election nights, and Jeremy Corbyn can't win, can he? If he wins in Stoke, it's nothing to do with him. If he loses in Copeland, it's everything to do with him. It's about hypocrites and democracy. Now, there's much to be said. Let's deal with the things that can be dispensed with quickly, and some of them are difficult for many of you to accept. The Tories are not hated in Britain. Nothing like as much as many of us like to think they are, and as they rightly should be. If they were, they wouldn't have won a by-election in Copeland last night, and they wouldn't have increased their vote by more than 2% in Stoke Central when the media narrative said they weren't even in the race. They'd put up a 25-year-old boy. And if you wanted to defeat Labour, well, you were being invited to vote for the nutter at the head of the United Kingdom Independence Party. But their vote went up by 2.2%, and they were actually just a hair's breadth behind the aforementioned Paul Nuttall. So if you are walking around Britain today thinking that this country is a seething mass of people just itching to get their finger on a general election trigger to be done and gone with Theresa May and the Tory government, you're making a big mistake. And that's something we're going to have to return to in the course of the 3 hours of this show. It's very important for the left to be able to distinguish between hundreds and thousands, and even more between thousands and millions. You can pack a room, you can get a lot of retweets on Twitter, though in parenthesis, when you later look at how many retweets they were, you almost always find they were in the hundreds rather than the thousands, let alone the millions. So, messages and political ideas, the battle of political ideas, is going to have to be looked at very seriously again. Secondly, there is no point in UKIP. Its only point was to get a referendum on membership of the European Union and then to win that referendum. And it's a historical achievement for them. Both of those objectives have been achieved. That could be disguised as long as Nigel Farage was the leader of UKIP. It can no longer be disguised. I have lost track of how many members of UKIP have been the leader. Certainly there have been 2 in the last few months. There may even have been 3, and I may have forgotten one of them. But the latest incarnation of leader of UKIP is not fit for purpose. Frankly, he's a joke figure. He's a figure that can't remember whether or not he completed his PhD, if he ever strode out with the first team of Tranmere Rovers, has no idea what's on his website, no idea what he's ever said into a microphone anywhere, and his defeat yesterday in the city he had embraced as his own, even living there or not, is the end for Paul Nuttall and the end for UKIP. Were Nigel Farage to return to the leadership, of which I think there is little likelihood, then they might be able to sustain an afterlife. Although, when you've got a Tory government that is delivering Brexit, that is quite sound on the issue of the European Union for people who want Britain out of the European Union, you have to ask that very obvious and big question: what is UKIP for? It's quite clear that no Tories in Stoke, because their vote went up, were even ready tactically to vote for UKIP in order to defeat a hardline Remainer candidate for Labour. Not only were they not prepared to tactically vote for UKIP. More people voted Tory than last time in the 2015 general election. And in the Copeland by-election, won by the Conservatives in a very, very fine and outstanding victory with apparently a very outstanding candidate, the UKIP vote was the one that collapsed tactically. It disappeared like snow in the summertime of a northern dike. That's a brick wall for those of you who are confused. I mention it because, and here I digress, though not really digressing. I just listened to the news bulletin as you did. I learned that it's news in Britain what someone thinks about transgender people's choice of toilets in the United States of America and what the President of the United States of America is going to do about it. A transgender man, woman, I don't know what stage she's at, her views on whether children, boys, should be allowed to go to girls' toilets if they quote-unquote identify as girls. Well, that's the politics of the liberal hothouse. And it's no doubt of some importance and a lot of importance to a few people. But it's not what they're thinking and talking about in Stoke Central or in Copeland. And if your politics is driven by that kind of ultra-liberal preoccupation, then you're nowhere, man. And you are going nowhere, to coin a phrase of Paul Nuttall. Back from my digression for a moment. There is no point in UKIP. Tories will not vote for it, certainly as led by Paul Nuttall, who doesn't know where he was and when he was and who he lost and what's on his website or even where he lives. And UKIP voters are more than ready to switch to the Conservatives, having achieved already their ambition to pull Britain out of the European Union. So it's my guess that UKIP, which I said here some months ago at this microphone, is for the history books. But the most salient feature of today's coverage of these by-election results is the monumental Everestian hypocrisy of the Blairites inside the Labour Party and the media echo chamber that was ready, revved up, souped up, ready to go if they had got the results that they wanted. Now, they now tell us Copeland is the important result, although, in parenthesis, every media outlet and all the media stars were, funnily enough, at Stoke. None of them were in Copeland. The coverage of the by-election early this morning, which I watched, had a series of regional amateurs presenting the programme because all the front-rank political journalists were in Stoke because they thought that Corbyn was going to be hooked on the spike of a UKIP breakthrough in Stoke. That didn't happen, although the result was not great. That didn't happen, and therefore Stoke is no longer of any importance at all. It's a footnote in the news of the day. What really matters, we're now being told, is the loss of a Labour heartland called Copeland. Have you ever been in the Copeland constituency? Because if you had been, you'd know that the description of Copeland as a Labour heartland is utterly ridiculous. Labour has been losing its majority in Copeland for years, even decades. I looked at the figures today. Jack Cunningham, now Lord Cunningham, a grandee of Labour politics, one of the front-rank leaders of Labour politics over 25 years, scraped home in the Copeland constituency. And Jamie Reid, about whom much more later, had reduced it to a marginal, which is one of the reasons why he's gone off to work for the nuclear power industry. He had reduced it to, as it says on the ticker tape I'm watching on TV, more than 2,500, as if that was a big majority. More than 2,500. That is a wafer-thin majority. It wasn't Jeremy Corbyn that lost all those votes. It wasn't Jeremy Corbyn that lost 4.5 million Labour votes between 1997 and 2010. It was a succession of Blairites who lost those votes, who lost that majority. Now, that's not to say, none of that is to say that Jeremy Corbyn is doing well as Labour's leader. He manifestly is not. And I have been, in as loyal a way as I can, indicating for as long as I have felt it necessary to do so, that as we say in Glasgow of footballers, Corbyn's going to have to up his game. He's going to have to get out of the Liberal hothouse. He's going to have to get out of Westminster. He's going to have to get out into the country, into the industrial and post-industrial parts of the country, and deliver cogently, eloquently, articulately, with no humming and hawing, no coughing and spluttering, and preferably in a decent suit, shirt and tie, the anti-austerity message that Sanders blistered the United States with in the elections last year, that Trump blistered the Rust Belt states of the United States with later in last year, and in a way which connects with ordinary people, which means he needs to be surrounded by ordinary people. I saw a very fine Labour spokesperson on Question Time last night, Angela Rayner. I'm about to speak to another very fine Labour representative, Richard Bergen, in a minute. The next leaders of the Labour Party have to look and sound like Angela Rayner and Richard Bergen. Labour has to move its political locus out of the Liberal hothouse and down onto the cold, mean streets of post-industrial Britain. These are my preliminary thoughts, and in the course of the next 3 hours, I'll be adumbrating them still more. Now, Richard Bergen is the Shadow Justice Secretary, the Labour MP for Leeds East, and even more importantly, he's on the line now and available to speak to you. Richard, thank you very much for joining us. I'm good. I predicted, albeit privately, because I did not want to add to your difficulties, that Labour would hold Stoke and would lose Copeland. That's how it worked out. What's your reading of this situation?
Well, the result in Stoke was obviously welcome, because Paul Nuttall, UKIP's new leader, thought it was the right place and right time for him to make the big jump, and he would have used Parliament as a platform for his brand of lies and the politics of division. So it was good that we beat back UKIP in Stoke. Obviously, it was very disappointing to lose in Copeland, although I would say that contrary to what some of the media are saying today, it's not a heartland Labour seat or a so-called safe Labour seat. In fact, for the majority of its history since it was formed as a constituency in 1983, it's been a marginal seat where Labour has won by small majorities. But nevertheless, it was a very disappointing result, and we do need to win back Copeland at the general election.
Well, these by-elections were occasioned by the entirely self-interested, self-centred resignation of two of Mr. Corbyn's most bitter critics, two fanatic uber Blairites, Jamie Reid in Copeland and Tristram Hunt, the clue is in the name, in Stoke Central, where he had scarcely set foot in his life before being parachuted in as the Labour MP by the now Lord Mandelson. Lord Mandelson revealed at the weekend, 4 days before the by-election, that he spends every waking day trying to bring down Jeremy Corbyn. And Tony Blair, 6 days before the by-election, delivered a landmark speech which was plastered across all media, in which he lambasted his own party and raised the banner of defiance of the British people's will in the EU referendum. So 2 by-elections caused by 2 resigning, embittered Blairites, a catastrophic intervention by the heart of Blairism, the Blair-Mandelson duo, and moreover, both of your candidates were both anti-Corbyn Blairites, including the one who won and the one who lost.
Well, first of all, I'd say about both of the departing members of Parliament that I consider it to be a great honour to be elected by your community, to represent that community. And I firmly believe that if you're asking people to vote for you to represent them in Parliament for the full parliamentary term, barring personal illness or other personal circumstances, you should see that full term out. But there are some people who think being a mere, in inverted commas, MP is beneath them. There are some people who don't really want to spend their Saturdays talking to Mr. or Mrs. Miggins at the advice sessions, and so disappear to take up high-paid jobs, for example, as the chief curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum, leaving the taxpayer to pick up the bill for the unnecessary by-election, but also leaving Labour Party members to pick up the bill for the unnecessary by-election, because the by-election in Stoke, for example, will have cost a lot of money to run that victorious campaign. We've seen this before with other people who haven't got the way, so have left Parliament to take on other jobs.
Well, I could take you back to the 1970s, sadly, and in my own city where I was the organiser, where self-inflicted by-elections, that is to say, the MP going on to far more lucrative pastures, is always punished by the electorate. But what about the Mandelson-Blair intervention on Friday and on Sunday? Have you ever known of 2 such prominent members of the Labour Party, and they are both still in the Labour Party, whilst Livingston and me are still out of it? Have you ever known, days before 2 important by-elections, 2 such prominent people launch such a ferocious attack on their own leader, on their own party?
I'm afraid that the timing of Tony Blair's intervention was deliberate, and for people who suspected that, I think that Peter Mandelson's speech saying that he labours night and day for the downfall of the elected leader of the Labour Party kind of gave the proof that many suspected was the case. I mean, it's not on for people's main Labour to be the removal of the elected leader of their own party. Our main Labour, day in, day out, should be the removal of this Conservative government, an end to austerity, and the building of a better society. So it was unfortunate timing, but I believe it was deliberate timing. But I would say this on the issue of Tony Blair's intervention about Brexit. Had Labour and had Jeremy Corbyn given in to the demands to attempt to veto the outcome of the EU referendum and the Article 50 vote, had that been the case, then Labour would have lost Stoke as well, and Paul Nuttall would be in Parliament, using Parliament as a platform for the expansion of an advance of UKIP as well. And if Owen Smith had been elected as leader of the Labour Party with his firm and clear policy to ignore the outcome of the EU referendum, I believe we would have lost Stoke as well. So we are in a tough situation, along with lots of, in fact, most socialist and social democratic parties across Europe, but things would not be plain sailing if we had another leader or if we'd have taken the opposite view on the Article 50 votes.
Well, now you're an educated working class man from a labour movement, working class family. So is the woman I saw on Question Time last night, Angela Rayner. Yours is the kind of voice, as is hers, that can resonate in industrial and post-industrial England, at least. But your voices are not the most prominent, and your priorities are not always Jeremy Corbyn's priorities, or at least that's how it seems, that's how it's perceived. Do you agree with me that the politics of the liberal hothouses in London, but also mini Londons in many big cities, they may be important, and they're very important to very few people, but they're not the priorities, not the preoccupations, not the interests of the vast majority of working people in the country. And Corbyn has to shake off the suspicion or the belief or the misconception, perhaps, that he's a student radical, a protest leader, rather than a prime minister of the Callaghan type in waiting.
Well, I think that Labour's economic policy, Labour's bread and butter policy that will deliver better living standards, better opportunities for working class people and lengthen the breadth of the country has to be and is our priority. But I'll let you into a little secret. On Twitter, anyone would think, and on Facebook, that the subject on everyone's lips is the outrage that Labour didn't block the outcome of an EU referendum that we voted in Parliament to take place in the first place. The secret is I only got 15 pieces of correspondence from people who live in my constituency demanding that I and Labour vote to block the outcome of the EU referendum. But some people don't seem to understand that. I also think we've got to, as I think the experience in the United States shows, put economic transformation in the interest of the vast majority of working class people first and foremost. And that has to be our priority. And I think that the allegations of betrayal by ultra liberals, sometimes in the page of newspapers like The Guardian, sometimes elsewhere, are removed from the concerns of working class people.
Well, I never usually quote Bill Clinton, but his rubric, "It's the economy, stupid," is still the smartest thing he ever said. Richard Bergen, thanks for joining us here.
Thank you very much.
The mother of all talk shows. Ken, the Old Testament prophet, formerly of the Highlands, now of Newcastle, is banned from my show for preaching religious hatred. But he has written to me, and it's only fair that I should read one paragraph at least of his scrawl. George, your refusal to allow me freedom of speech on your show certainly proves you lie when you claim to allow freedom of speech and opinion. But banning me from your anti-Israel, anti-Christ, anti-Bible and anti-Christian program also clearly reveals that you are a religious hypocrite who cannot handle the truth. That's me. I've got the heart of a mouse. Ken. Now, here's a text. Say what you will of the man, George, but when Tony spoke, the whole of Europe listened. No party has that currently. We can keep apologising for Labour. After the whip, 1 in 5 obfuscated. I like the man, but it's done now. Well, I'm not sure I understand that wholly, but it's certainly true that when Tony bombed, the whole of Europe and indeed the whole of the world listened. When Mr. Blair unleashed murder and mayhem across the world, killing more than 1 million people, creating ISIS, and sending fanatic extremism all around the globe. All of Europe, indeed, all of the world, had to sit up and take notice. Now, an email from Martin. Hello, George, working class, now ex-UKIP voter and a great fan of yours. But I can't vote for UKIP anymore with that incompetent buffoon Paul Nuttall in charge. UKIP is a now non-entity without Nigel Farage steering the ship. Where do ex-UKIP voters like me and others go now? We need a new political party set up by the working class to serve the interests of the working class. Now, let's take the first call of the evening. It's past time. It's this one from David in London. Go ahead, David.
Thank you very much, George. I'm going to come at this question from the left, not from the right.
Yeah.
When I woke up this morning and I found out the result of Copeland, I thought about Jeremy's inertia at actually fighting the Blairites. And then after a few minutes, I got a bit more angry about it. And I thought, if I was someone in Copeland, where is what I know about Jeremy Corbyn is that he's anti-nuclear. Well, I'm anti-nuclear, you're anti-nuclear, we know that. But where is the policy about when we get into power, we're going to safeguard your jobs. We're not going to have the same jobs, maybe, but we're going to give you other jobs. We're going to invest in your communities. This is a cast-iron guarantee from a socialist, a principled man. There is none of that. No wonder the people of Copeland just ignore it. And this is the second point. The point which is even worse. His inability to stand up for his own principles. It's not about his own principles, which is against like the South Africans or the miners or whatever. It's that he doesn't want to upset the members of the Labour Parliamentary Party, who are the same people that support Saudi Arabia, that support the Zionist Israelis, what have you, the nuclear weapons, the terrible destruction around the world, the whole inequality. And his inertia is not now, it's starting to get right on my nerves to the point that I really want him to go. Unfortunately, there is no one to take his place. And I just want to add one other thing to it. George, I've heard you speak many times. I've heard the great Tony Benn speak many times. I've heard Eric Heffer. I've heard Michael Foot. I've heard all the great people speaking, all the great people. But there's only one person that's ever been expelled from the Labour Party, George, and you know who that is. That's you. I'm really worried that though I like Jeremy Corbyn and I think he's a principled man, he's too much a Labour man. And the fact is that we, as a class, can't cope with this anymore. We need a fighting socialist alternative, or even not even socialist, anti-austerity alternative. And we need someone with the balls, pardon my language, to actually stand up. And I don't think Jeremy's it anymore. Of course, I'm not going to turn around and say, get rid of him, vice versa, because there's no one in the Parliamentary Labour Party I can think that could take his place. But nevertheless, people like yourself and that, when we need to think of another strategy, because this is just too much now. But he's going to lose all the support, all the goodwill, all the wonderful aspiration and inspirations of the people coming back and actually arguing. And it's just because he's too scared to fight the Blairites, these murderers, these right wingers, these Tories in clothing, these people that support Saudi Arabia.
David, stay on the line. I've got to take a break, but I want to respond to the many important points that you've made. Before the break, we took a call, a very impassioned and eloquent one, from David in London, and he's kindly stayed on the line. Thanks for that, David, because I want to respond to some of the things that you said. First of all, none of us should underestimate the difficulty that Corbyn has getting any message at all through the thicket of media hostility, which is wall-to-wall, left to right, and extremely dense. Having said that, so did Donald Trump face almost exactly that same level of media hostility and establishment ridicule. But he won, and Corbyn is not yet doing so. So there has to be a way found to get over the heads of, around the backs of, all of these. I see even Gary Young in The Guardian today, the last remaining voice against neoliberalism in The Guardian, has jumped ship. I won't mention Owen Jones because, frankly, he's unmentionable. The second point I want to make is your ideas, which I think are also my ideas, are not hegemonic in this country, and we must not assume that they are. You see, we say things like austerity, anti-austerity. Frankly, a very large number of people in the country don't even know what that means, because it isn't being put into the kind of popular language that it needs to be put into. And it is not yet a battle won. That, for example, the National Health Service, together with the English language, is one of the two finest things that we have or have ever had. In the case of Copeland, the Tories are going to close a maternity hospital, forcing women in labour to travel a bad road 40 miles to Carlisle in order to give birth. But the people elected the Tories. So the importance, the value of the NHS, the importance of defeating the austerity neoliberal economics that has blighted much of the world, these are battles not yet won and which still need to be won. The third point, and I'm angry like you, and I got more angry the more I listened to you. Yeah. We keep hearing about a mass Labour Party, 650,000 members of the Labour Party. Where are they? Why weren't they on the streets in these two by-elections? And don't tell me anyone that they were, because I saw all the pictures. And I know about these things. I've been campaigning all of my life. For 50 years I've been in election campaigns. And when I see a picture telling me that this is our happy crew out campaigning on the streets of Stoke, on the streets of Copeland, and I can count the number of people in the picture, and there's no sign of anybody out of range, there's no sign that it's a small picture of a big crowd. Where are these 650,000 members? We keep hearing about momentum, 20,000, 25,000 members. Where are they? Why aren't they an army so big that you couldn't capture it in any wide-angled lens in every political contest that's going on like this? Now, I'm also angry at Jeremy Corbyn, and not for reasons entirely that I suspect you will agree with. I'm angry that he didn't button up his tie at the Abbey or at St. Paul's Cathedral. I'm angry that he didn't sing the national anthem. I'm angry about all these petty, liberal, hothouse obfuscations which got his leadership off to such a bad start. If I'd been the leader, I'd have looked like I just walked out of a tailor's window. I'd have sung the national anthem, and loudly. I'd have bowed at the cenotaph, and deeply. I would have made sure that nobody could attack me on these, frankly, mediocre, marginal preoccupations of much of the country and of many, many hypocrites. I know that the cenotaph was surrounded, in a minute, I know that the cenotaph was surrounded by hypocrites. I know that the hypocrisy of people causing wars, supposedly mourning the losses in those wars, is very difficult to stomach. I don't believe in the monarchy, but we've got a monarchy, and Remembrance Sunday is a national icon. I don't believe in the monarchy, but that's the national anthem that we've got, and you've got to sing it. Secondly, you said I was anti-nuclear. I'm not anti-nuclear. I'm anti-nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
I believe that nuclear power has an important part to play in energy generation. And I suspect that so does Jeremy Corbyn. But he made loose remarks in response to the Fukushima reactor disaster, which were then used ruthlessly against him in a place where people's entire livelihood depends upon the nuclear energy industry. And lastly, and I have a personal interest, I am very angry indeed. Not that Jeremy Corbyn has not been able to reinstate the hundreds of thousands of people who have been frozen, suspended, expelled, lost their vote, not because he couldn't do it. I'm not angry with that, because I know the arithmetic, and I know that he couldn't do it. I'm angry that he didn't try. I'm angry that he didn't confront those that were stopping him doing the right thing by those people. I'm angry that he allowed these Blairite traitors to destabilise time after time after time the entire labour movement and the working class that depends upon it in this country. Over to you, David.
Can I just ask you one question, George?
Yes.
What do you think, why was the reason that Jeremy Corbyn did not go to the people of Copeland and say, I understand your concerns, we have a disagreement about nuclear industry, but I guarantee you that as a member of the Labour Party, as a man that's always stood by his word, that I will protect your livelihoods for all the people of the country, not just you, but I will protect your livelihoods, that if we have a disagreement about nuclear power, I will support you to make sure that you will not be at a loss. In fact, we as a Labour Party will increase jobs and security in the region. And you have my word of that. That's not was lost. Why did he say that? And this
Maybe
is
he did, David.
Hang on, just quickly. I was upset because he doesn't want to upset the nuclear lobby within the Labour Party parliamentary party. Those same evil people, as far as I'm concerned, who stood up and supported Saudi Arabia. He's too scared to actually upset them.
No, I don't think he's scared, David. He's not scared. He's not a coward, and he's a good and honest man.
I've been waiting for him to actually move his bum on this.
He's not scared, but he's making the wrong judgments on some of these matters. Anyway, thanks for allowing me to respond to you, and thanks for a really powerful call. Let's go to our man on the ground, Guy, in Stoke-on-Trent, who can finally speak about the by-elections. Go ahead, Guy.
Good evening, George. Yeah, the big Beluga. He nearly did it, and he probably would have done. He would have done better if he'd have been more guarded with what he didn't read on his own website. If he was smart enough to put a genuine address where he was supposed to be living at the time of nomination form submission, and those things generally worked against him and cost him thousands of votes in this constituency. Positively, the Labour guy, you question the Labour Party. I sometimes despair with them. They put up a guy here who was a Remainer in a constituency which was 69% exit, and that was the third thing that this guy was being attacked for continually. You're a Remainer, but the constituency voted exit. So he was having to whittle his way or try to work his way out of that one.
Well, he also had to walk around the streets of Stoke with a man, Jeremy Corbyn, that he had described on Twitter as an IRA-supporting friend of Hamas.
Absolutely, yeah, as well as...
He had a record as long as your arm on Twitter. All these people that got expelled or suspended because of tweets and retweets in the run-up to the leadership election, how come the same machinery couldn't find a series of, frankly, in some cases, horrific tweets by the now MP for Stoke-on-Trent? How?
I don't know. I don't know how they come to select the people they select. I'm glad that Labour won it. I didn't want UKIP to win.
Of course.
But they don't half make it hard for themselves. And as regards the candidate they put up, 36.9% of Stoke-on-Trent Central turned out to vote. When you saw the candidate, it has to be said that he looked like exactly the sort of person who switches people off around here.
Yeah.
Because
he is a block of wood. He's the big palooka. At least Nuttall's a nutter, and quite interesting and amusing. The person that the Labour Party put up wasn't just the repository of all kinds of repugnant views, but was, frankly, a bore. He could bore for Britain. And he was very lucky that he did get elected. And it was a pitiful sight for a Labour victor in a by-election that got 7,000 votes to be talking as if he was addressing the Forum in Rome, as if he was responsible for some great triumph.
George, I wish that the communication people on the Labour Party would say to the MPs, will you stop talking this business talk, corporate speak? Can we get to the very basics of these issues? Why are we in austerity? Was it the dustbin men and the dinner ladies who lost us that money? Is it those who've got to suffer for this? Instead of the stuff they talk about, it bewilders me. And it's no wonder that there's so many people here who they can't listen to them because you can't understand what they're saying.
Well, I think that's brilliantly put. This desiccated corporate speak that crept into Labour language in the Blair era is not only an offence against the English language, the beautiful English language, it is incomprehensible to the great majority of people at who it is addressed. That's my complaints about it. Guy, thanks for that fantastic call. Carol on Facebook says, Corbyn needs to start deselecting, and pretty damn quick. They are destroying the party. Well, he's not going to be doing any deselecting. He couldn't even get anybody half decent to stand to be a new MP in the two by-elections. You're talking about deselecting. Corbyn could not get two people that supported him to run in the by-elections yesterday. Now, Adam Bienkov on Twitter says, Paul Nuttall will, quote, wipe out Labour and all the other failed predictions of impending UKIP victories. This is a very, very intelligent and clever compilation by Adam Bienkov. I hope he's listening. There are so many I can't do justice to them all. The Express said, under its new leader, UKIP could wipe out Labour, says Stephen Pollard in the Express on this occasion. And John Harris, that long-haired, overgrown beetle in the Guardian, says Stoke-on-Trent is the Brexit heartland that could be Corbyn's Waterloo. And there's many, many more where that came from. Here's another one from the Guardian, from Labour MP, believe it or not. Frank Field says in the Guardian, UKIP leader Paul Nuttall is game changer for Labour, says Frank Field. Nuttall could help UKIP take string of seats from Jeremy Corbyn's party in the north of England, says senior Labour MP. Senior only in the respect that he's hung around in the House of Commons tea room for many decades. And here's another one. Stoked for victory, UKIP's Paul Nuttall predicted to trounce Labour and win Tristram Hunt Stoke Central seat by 10 points. Labour is on course to come second on 25%, despite Hunt's large majority was never a large majority, by the way. Hunt saw to that. And the Tories third on 10%. Did you get that? Shall I read that one more time? UKIP's Paul Nuttall predicted to trounce Labour and win Tristram Hunt's Stoke Central seat by 10 points. Now, none of that, of course, came to pass. Instead, the party under existential threat right now is UKIP. Because people are asking, what is the point of it? Well, a very clever and eloquent man with whom I sat in Parliament for many decades and who is now the leader of UKIP on the Welsh National Assembly is Neil Hamilton. And he joins me now on the telephone. Neil, it's a question that can't be dodged, isn't it? What is the point of UKIP any longer?
Well, George, it's great to be on your show again. And I know people are asking this. I think the big problem with last night's result was that we encouraged people to believe that an earthquake was about to happen when clearly it wasn't. This is a seat which Labour has held for 100 years, and it really would be an earthquake if they lost Stoke Central. Copeland, I think, is a slightly different kettle of fish. It was a relatively marginal seat with the Tories anyway. But the point of UKIP is that once we leave the European Union, there's a void left in British politics which UKIP can fill, which none of the other parties wants to occupy. And I think we made the wrong decision about the way in which to run the campaign in Stoke, because it was all based upon Brexit, and that ceased to be a real issue, I think, for ordinary working people, because the referendum was last year. Theresa May, whatever one may think of her and how genuine she is, she's making a good pitch of sounding as though she means to take us out of the EU, and I don't think that that's what was in the forefront of the minds of people in Stoke. I spent several days up there canvassing, talking to people, and what they're interested in are the bread and butter issues which affect their daily lives. And so I think that UKIP's place in future is on issues which affect ordinary working people in their wallets, because these are people on the breadline, people just about managing, as Theresa May likes to call them. I think UKIP's message is a strong one. I'm in favour of slashing the overseas aid budget and putting the money which is saved into the National Health Service, for example. I want to get rid of subsidies for wind farms, which are added to everybody's electricity bills, which are £300 on average higher than they need be. These are the issues which should really resonate with people in places like Stoke-on-Trent. And unfortunately, the Labour Party is diametrically opposed to these kinds of policies. So that, I think, is the future for UKIP.
Well, I think that's very well put, and let's nail one of those points down right now, and I think that no one else has made this point. Brexit is the settled will now of the British people, so there's no point in running as if it were still an open question. Yeah. It has been decided, and whether enthusiastically in her heart or otherwise, the Prime Minister Theresa May is implementing the decision, and the Labour opposition is supporting the implementation of that decision. So it's a strategic error, isn't it, to fight last year's battles this year. But isn't another one that Nuttall's whole pitch was to appeal to working class Labour voters, when in fact, tactically, the thing to do yesterday was to persuade the Tory voters that if they would even lend their vote to UKIP, then Labour would be defeated and they could go back to being Tories at the general election. Instead, the Tory vote increased in the by-election.
You're actually right, George, because what happened in Copeland was that the UKIP vote was squeezed successfully by the Tories, but in Stoke, the Tory vote was not successfully squeezed by UKIP. And if the Tory vote had, say, halved in Stoke, and that vote had transferred to UKIP, then we would have won the seat. And the measure of the modern Labour Party's failure in Stoke over many, many years is that in 1997 Labour got 66% of the vote in Stoke, and last night they got 37%, and they're ecstatic at having retained a seat which Labour has had for 100 years. And that tells you all you need to know about the modern state of the Labour Party.
And that long predates, that decline long predates the very short period in which Jeremy Corbyn has been the leader.
Yes, indeed. I think Tony Blair actually ripped the soul and heart out of the Labour Party because they had this triangulation policy. It didn't really matter what you said, so long as it happened to win votes for the time being. But that's a kind of policy over a long period of time just results in incoherence, and then nobody knows what your party stands for. And Labour has had to come to terms with what Tony Blair did to it in those years after he became the leader. And I don't think that Labour has quite answered the problem yet. I mean, I was in the House of Commons, as you were, with Jeremy Corbyn for many years. He was a thoroughly honest, decent person, principled person, and I think whatever criticisms are made of him, that he is a good thing for politics, because so many people today say you can't trust politicians, you can't believe what they say, but over many, many years in politics, he stood up for the things that he's believed in, and I think we need more people like that in politics today.
Amen. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot because we're old friends, but I wouldn't be doing my job
Absolutely.
if I didn't. Paul Nuttall turned out to be a disastrous by-election candidate, didn't he?
Well, I think he wasn't. I don't think he was a disastrous by-election candidate because he's a very personable and eloquent individual, and on the stump he's very, very good. But I think what happened was that issues which are totally peripheral about what was on his website 6 years ago dominated the campaign, and we have this absolute idiot, Aaron Banks, who claims to be UKIP's biggest donor, but isn't actually a member of the party and hasn't actually given us any money for 2.5 years, as I understand it, who said some grossly offensive things about Hillsborough in the last week or two in the campaign. And those words were attributed to Paul by many people that I met on the streets in Stoke. And as a result of that, we weren't able to generate momentum because all the headlines were about this stuff which was of no consequence whatsoever and didn't affect people in real life, had no connection whatever with policy, and as a result, we couldn't do what the Liberals had done so many times effectively in by-election campaigns, created an impression of movement in our favour, which might have produced the squeeze on the Tory vote, which would have enabled us to win. But I think that Paul is a good thing. He's a working-class lad from Bootle and very genuine. And I think that he will be a successful leader. He's only been leader for 12 weeks, and so this by-election test came rather early in the day. But I have faith in him, and I will continue to support him.
And he's going on, you think? He's continuing?
Oh, definitely. No, I've spoken to him since the result was announced last night, and he made a speech actually to activists where we were all waiting to hear the result in a hotel in Stoke last night, where he made that perfectly clear.
Neil Hamilton, many thanks to you, as always. David says you have just given the reasons why Corbyn is not the man to lead the Labour Party and the country. And Scouser Lars says heaven and earth should be moved to get Peter Mandelson expelled from Labour. He's an absolute wretch of a man. And Ford says, I'm so proud of the people of Stoke for not voting for UKIP. I now have faith in the British. And Toby Hobson says, I'd love to know where these cushy jobs that suddenly appeared for the new Labour no marks came from. Tony's famous war chest. Well, that's actually a good point, Toby. The Member of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent in the bleak midwinter deserted his constituents, a rat jumping off the ship, and went to become the director of the Victoria and Albert Museum, don't you know? And Jamie Reid, another rat, jumped ship in the bleak midwinter in Copeland, jumped from the ship into the Sellafield nuclear plant, where he has now landed a lucrative job at least double the salary. And these people have the gall, the nerve to lecture Jeremy Corbyn. You really couldn't make it up. John is on the line in Hamilton in Scotland. Go ahead, John.
Hi, George. Thanks for taking my call.
Welcome.
Just a quick point, George. It's always with amusement and bemusement that I see how these things are reported. And Stoke and Trent was won for Labour despite Jeremy Corbyn, yet Copeland was lost because of Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd like to say is if we look at Labour's collapse in the last 20 years, actually in 1997 when Tony Blair won, sorry, I'm a bit out of breath.
It's okay.
When he won the election in 97, between then and the end of his project in 2010 with Gordon Brown, they'd actually lost a third of their supporters.
Yes.
43%.
Long before Jeremy Corbyn had anything to do with it.
Exactly.
Blair and Brown lost nearly 4.5 million votes.
Yeah, yet Jeremy Corbyn is supposed to be responsible for that.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you?
I know. I don't know. I'm having Jeremy himself. I don't know if there are so many forces against him that I don't know if it's going to be possible for him to actually win an election. I think he would be a good Prime Minister in that position. And I know it's fashionable of late for Prime Ministers not to be elected to that position. I think 2 of the last 3 have gone there by a circuitous route.
That's true, yes.
But I can see his enemies massing against him, and I fear for him.
Yes, good point. John, well made. John in Hamilton, the capitalist messages are back. Now, 100 years ago, exactly, the Russian revolutionaries distilled an entire revolutionary, complex economic program to 3 words: peace, land, bread. And they repeated and repeated and repeated that slogan. And that slogan swept them to power in October of 1917. Now, in this social media age, it is even more important than it ever has been to speak in language that people understand and can relate to, can be moved by. And desiccated corporate speak doesn't do it. Neither does oh so achingly politically correct liberal hothouse speech. You have to distill what it is that you're saying and proposing into a few eloquent, powerful words. Peace, land, bread, summed up the Bolshevik program in 3 words. Whoever's writing the words for Jeremy Corbyn is going to have to get pretty busy, pretty quick in distilling his message down. Here's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. And this is not a poor me telephone call, but I'm not a well woman, and I'll be 79 in a week, and I want to see this awful Tories get out. The thing I'm trying to say is, I totally agree with you that Corbyn needs to get out into the country with the support of all the Labour Party members, new ones as well, and possibly promote his anti-austerity message.
Yeah.
And I supported John McDonnell because I like him, and we've got to get these Tories out, and we've got to hope that when the next election comes, we have a Labour Party in. The second point quickly is that I've been a member of CND for years, and Corbyn is anti-nuclear weapons that blow up the world, and millions are going to be spent on it when that amount of money could help get this country and the people a little bit more equality, because there's an awful lot of upset from the poorer people around. So that's my
Well, the only
see.
disagreement I have with you, Norma,
Yeah.
is that it's not millions, it's hundreds of
Billions.
billions.
Yeah.
Hundreds of billions. Hundreds of billions on weapons that can never be used because the use of them would be an act of national suicide. Our entire island would cease to exist, would be vaporized in response upon the use of these weapons of hundreds of billions of pounds. But that's a different thing from nuclear power being used to generate energy and electricity. And it was a great pity, to say the least, that this message was allowed to be confused and obfuscated. I am as against nuclear weapons as you, but I'm and have always been in favor of nuclear power. I want the peaceful use of the atom, not the self-destructive use of it. Thanks for the call, Norma. Let's go to Declan in Liverpool. Declan, welcome.
Good evening, George. It's a great pleasure and privilege to speak to you.
Thank you, sir.
While I've been waiting, I'm not complaining, but I've filled a page, an A4 page of notes. May I read some of them out, and then you can pick what you want to discuss? Paul Nuttall is not a clown, known locally in Liverpool as a MEF, MEFF. I explained that to Bonnie Greer, who appreciated the explanation because she didn't know what MEF meant.
I don't know either. Tell me.
Well, look it up. It's funny. There are young Spanish-speaking people, not just from Spain, but from Latin America, South America, in Liverpool, working or studying and setting up their own businesses here, who love Jeremy Corbyn. I liked what you said, that Corbyn faces the thicket of the media hate. Gary Young from The Guardian has now jumped ship. I'm livid, George. Jeremy Corbyn, despite his criticisms, I do think would be a good leader. We need to get the Tories out. I agree with Norma from Bristol just before. The Tories are effectively wanting to cull people, I believe, through these sanctions, people who can't work through disability. There's been suicides. The National Health Service is in crisis, and Jeremy Hunt has always evaded so many times. Dr. Rachel Hunt from Oxford, who is a spokesperson for the NHS, has confronted Jeremy Hunt on the telly. She's even looked at the camera and said, "Mr. Hunt, will you please meet us?" There's so many horrible things going on because of the Tories. UKIP is the least of our worries. I would love to know more about the voters in Copeland who voted Conservative. And I've been looking into the Ron Todd Foundation recently. They're doing great work. I'm 59 years of age now, and I was talking to somebody who's 20 years older than me, who remembers Barbara Castle and Bessie Braddock fondly, and a young black person I spoke to recently from London in Liverpool, who was a big fan of Barbara and the Toomey and Diane Abbott. And we were also got on to discussing John McDonnell's economic plans for the future, which I think would be great. There's so many distractors within the Labour Party, as you know, who don't think...
well, this is a pretty fundamental point, Declan,
yes.
And it's getting late, very late, to deal with this. This needed to be dealt with in the full flush of Corbyn's victory. He needed to say, "I'm the overwhelming choice of the Labour Party's members. It is not tenable for me to have a National Executive Committee which is blocking everything that I try to do, picking candidates who hate me, who undermine me, and who, if they're elected to Parliament, will sit behind me and stab me in the back." And that's when this should have been tackled. He then had to win a second landslide majority, and he still didn't do that. So that the vast majority of the country have no idea. People ask me every day, how come your mate, Jeremy Corbyn, that you have supported more than anybody else in the country, in British public life, on media, on television, on radio, on social media, how come he hasn't brought you back into the Labour Party? And I have to explain to them that he has no ability to do so. He cannot do so, because the National Executive would not allow him to do so. Ditto Ken Livingstone. Ditto many other things. Now, why do I have to explain that to people who don't know? Everybody should know that Corbyn is being thwarted and blocked and obstructed by a group of people that nobody knows, whose names nobody could identify, because they happen to have been nominated by the National Union of Paperclip Manufacturers to a position on Labour's NEC, or Councillor Mumbo Jumbo, who can't speak straight but has a vote to thwart the leadership of the man who got hundreds of thousands of votes in the Labour leadership election. That's the problem with this, Declan. Thanks for your call, my friend. Always a pleasure to hear from you, and I'll have to look up that word. MEF. MEFF. Big Al texts, "Hi George, the people of Copeland are following a trend that they are fed up with all talk, no action garbage that politicians come out with, just like the USA with Trump, who is a breath of fresh air. And the people who lost are shocked. Well, shocked I am not. Times are changing, and for the better. For the better. Deal with it, people," says Big Al. Well, that would be a more persuasive point, Big Al, if the people hadn't voted for the Conservative Party. In Copeland, victoriously, and even in Stoke, where nobody in the media and in the political class gave them a prayer, not a prayer of a hope. 2.2% more people voted Tory in Stoke Central, for God's sake, than did at the last election in 2015. So you have to face some facts, Al, and everybody out there. Not everybody does hate the Tories. Not everybody is yet persuaded on the issue of austerity. Many people think that Theresa May is doing quite a good job. And here's the hardest thing of all, the bitterest pill of all for us to swallow. Maybe not everyone in the country loves the National Health Service like we do, and that endlessly ploughing that furrow no longer brings in an electoral dividend. After all, the people in Copeland have just voted to close their own maternity hospital and subject their wives and daughters to a 40-mile drive in a bad road to Carlisle to give birth. Now, that's difficult for us to swallow, but we're going to have to think hard about this whole package of issues. Damien, the legend, is on the line from Brighton. We must hear him. Go ahead, Damien.
Good evening, George.
Hi.
George, I was actually campaigning in Copeland for 7 days in the run-up to the by-election.
Okay, this is a report from the front.
It is a report from the front. I was campaigning 12 hours a day. You know the drill, George. 3-hour door-stepping rounds, then back to the office for 2 hours of hammering the phones. Very sore knuckles from knocking doors. I must have spoken in 7 days to almost 1,000 people in the Copeland constituency.
Okay.
So I would say my view is the bottom line is that people in Copeland just run out of patience with the Labour Party. I heard, just to challenge this issue that Jeremy Corbyn's leadership was raised, I heard far more people mention that New Labour completely ignored the constituency for the 13 years it was in power than I did hear people talking about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Now, there are many reasons we lost Copeland, George. I'll just rattle through them before I get to my main point, if I may.
Yes.
So firstly, is the point I've already raised, is that New Labour did nothing for the constituency of Copeland for 13 years. It completely ignored the constituency. key reason I would suggest is that Jamie Reid compounded that perception of neglect by dishonouring his contract with the constituents and by deserting them. I think a third reason would be that voters don't vote for divided, ill-disciplined parties. And I think that this brings us all back to the plotters. I mean, the ill-disciplined and divisive behaviour of Jamie Reid and his fellow plotters, and of course the chief plotter, Peter Mandelson, who I'd like to return to at the end. I think it's utterly repellent to voters when they see that kind of division in a party. And I think the other factor, which was very important, is that the public were completely unaware of what Labour's policies were. I mean, we could have neutralised the Tories. The Tories were delivering leaflets which were saying that the Labour Party were going to close down Sellafield. Now, we had a good line that which came too late, frankly, George, on Millside. The Labour Party was going to guarantee the funding of Millside, which is the nuclear power station which the Tories have been faffing around on.
Yeah, exactly.
2010. Toshiba had just failed to have their accounts audited. They're going to be pulling out, and Labour would guarantee to underfund financing. Now, that on the doorstep, I found that completely neutralised it. And then we were talking about Millside, then we were talking about the Sellafield pensions, and it was a completely different ballgame, I found. So, to move on, I'll keep moving, George, because I would like to cover a bit of ground, and I think this is quite an important time to say these things. Because of all of the plotting that we've had, the plotters have been busier attacking their own party than promoting the policies of the party. And this all revolves around the central theme of what is politics. Now, for me, politics is about providing the hope and tools to people to create a decent future for themselves. And that's what it's all about. Now, John McDonnell gave a speech last year which directly addressed that point. And it's a key economic policy of the Labour Party, which is people are largely unaware of. And that policy is that it's a strategic plan for the country, and the plan is to have a national investment bank with regional investment banks distributing the funds to upgrade the infrastructure of this country. Now, if we're talking bread and butter, let's talk about how that would directly apply to Copeland, for example. So for Copeland, what it would mean is that the Northern Regional Investment Bank would invest to upgrade West Cumberland Hospital. It would provide low-interest loans to small and medium-sized businesses. It would guarantee the funding of Millside Power Station. It would upgrade the awful internet network which is holding back the Copeland economy. It would upgrade and widen the road to Carlisle, which would increase the economy by getting people travelling into Whitehaven and the surrounding areas. And it would review the housing needs and deliver new builds and refurbishment where necessary. Now, if people want that kind of investment in their constituencies, there is clearly only one leader on party that will do that, and that's Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. Now, the problems we face in the Labour Party are twofold. You've already highlighted, George, that there's one thing that Jeremy Corbyn must do, and that is he must prepare himself to campaign as if he were Bernie Sanders, not only running for the primary, but also running a general election in the presidency. We're talking a 2-year back-to-back campaign out on a monthly basis, meeting and greeting people, because whenever he does that, he goes down an absolute storm.
He does, yeah.
But the final thing that he's got to do, George, and this is critical for the whole infrastructure programme, is he's got to instill discipline on the Labour Party. Now, this is a free country, and Peter Mandelson is fully entitled to speak as freely as he likes. What he isn't entitled to do is to openly declare that he is plotting against the democratically elected leader of the Labour Party each and every day whilst he is sitting on Labour benches. And I think that Peter Mandelson has left Jeremy Corbyn no choice. Mr. Corbyn will have to call Peter Mandelson into his office, I would suggest next week, and inform him that the Labour whip has been withdrawn because he has brought the party into disrepute. He needs to set an example, and I think you couldn't set a better example than to the lead plotter against his leadership.
Well, I could think of a better example, although I agree with everything else that you said. Peter Mandelson is a loathsome, reptilian individual, but he's the monkey, not the organ grinder. The organ grinder has the blood of 1 million people on his hands. He destroyed, with George Bush, Iraq, broke it into dozens of pieces, killed 1 million people, spawned ISIS, and yet is still going around with a Labour Party membership card in his pocket. And nothing, not a finger, has been raised against him, or a word publicly spoken against him in these terms by the Labour leaders. That shows me a profound miscalculation in terms of sending the message to the army that Blair still commands in Parliament and in the Labour bureaucracy, in the machinery, in the regional offices, that Corbyn's leadership represented a profound change. And change there was going to be, whether these people liked it or not. Damien.
Yeah, I entirely agree. It's an absolute disgrace that you have a former leader of the Labour Party and one of his lieutenants actively engaged in a campaign to sabotage the Labour Party in the run-up to crucial by-elections.
Yeah. 4 days before, in Mandelson's case, 6 days before in Blair's case, a full frontal assault on Labour, on its leader, and on the positions of the Labour Party.
George, we're finding ourselves in exactly the same position in the Labour Party with the NEC that Senator Sanders found himself dealing with the DNC, with the Democrat establishment, and that is this. In a nutshell, both the DNC and the NEC and Ian McNicol would rather Labour lose an election and the DNC would rather the Democrats lost an election to the Republicans than they were to lose power in the party. And that's what they're all about, and that has to be dealt with. And Mr. Corbyn, I think, has got to discipline Peter Mandelson immediately. He's also got to call the NEC for a meeting. Ian McNicol must be replaced from his role as the General Secretary of the Labour Party. There will have to be a vote on that, and if there is a vote and people vote against Ian McNicol being removed, then those people's names must be made public, and so the membership can ensure that their political career in the Labour Party is over.
Damien in Brighton, as always, a pleasure to hear your report, in this case from the front in Copeland. Elizabeth, welcome.
Good evening. Good evening, George.
And to you, madam.
Well, I was going to talk about Copeland and the nuclear, but I want to change it now. I want to appeal to everybody out there to don't listen to the media and the television. It's a lot of lies. I'm a mum with 2 very disabled daughters. Life's being made a misery for us, and not only for us, for the homeless. There's young people out on the streets. They're hungry. They're cold. They're freezing. There's people being made homeless every day by this Tory government. They keep sneaking in little things. Just like you don't have to have a house now fit to live in for human habitation. They're so wicked and cruel and sneaky. They're doing the ordinary people. The working class have been brainwashed into thinking they're doing good things when they're not. They're evil. They're evil.
Well, I agree with that. I think that. But plainly, Elizabeth, not enough others in the country think that. Otherwise, the Tories wouldn't have, in mid-term, have put their vote up in Stoke and won the seat in Copeland.
Have they not seen the food banks? Have they not seen the people? It's as if they can't see the total sadness of people's lives are being ruined. People are dying of hunger. The sanctions are terribly cruel to some people. They've got nothing. Having to go, you're severely disabled. We've got to go for examinations to make sure that we are severely disabled. It is torture and worrying.
A woman with no hands. Maybe Edward can get me this story. A woman with no hands was sanctioned this week, sanctioned because she didn't open the letter from the department. She couldn't open it because she has no hands. And the letter, when opened, said that she was fit for work.
People need to listen to the real news, what's going on. Don't be brainwashed. Everything isn't all right. And just because you've got a nice warm house and you've got a job, please don't be selfish. Think of everybody in this country.
Well, Elizabeth, it's not even just don't be selfish, though as a religious believer myself, that is an article of faith. But you are only one closure, one redundancy notice, one shutdown of your workplace away from being one of those people.
Sadly.
Any day, your boss can give you a redundancy notice. Any day, your company could shut down. Any day, your company could cut back. And then you're on the dole. Then you are at the mercy of these people who told a woman with no hands that she must be sanctioned.
George, I'm 63. They've not given me my pension at 60. I've been looking after disabled children all my life for a carer's allowance of £63 a week. And that is what I've done. I've dedicated my life to other people. And I'm so angry that they took my pension away because I'm desperate for it now and I need it. This Tory government have taken so much from us. Anyway, I'm not going to waffle on, George.
No, you didn't waffle for 1 second. You spoke from the heart and you pierced the heart of everyone who heard you. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that call. I'm narrating. I'm almost finished. I'll finish this coming week. The 1901 novel by Robert Tressel, The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropist. And it's a study of how an advanced worker, Owen, who could see what needed to be done, who could see what was happening in the country and the world, his difficulty in persuading his fellow workers with their backsides literally hanging out of their trousers, with their boots nailed together to keep the upper and the sole together, who could be and were at an hour's notice sacked by ruthless sweater employers. How difficult Owen found it to persuade people of their own interests, not to be unselfish, not to care about others, not to prioritize other people's interests, but to see their own interests. And that's how I feel this evening. And I'm angry, as you probably have already inferred. Glasgow Kiwi says, Tory Tristram Hunt failed to create a crisis with JC's leadership. Luckily, the plotters had a backup plan. Treacherous Jamie Reid. We shouldn't even mention his name, actually. He's not worth it. Glasgow Kiwi says, meth describes an alcoholic homeless person who lives in a house. The word originates from Liverpool. Crystal Tips 7 says, Blairites lost Copeland for us. What a useless, vindictive bunch they are. About time they grew up. Let's go to Tina in Newham. Go ahead, Tina.
Hello, George. It's very poignant that you come to me after speaking about the bag-of-trousered philanthropist, because that was the book that we were all brought up on.
Me too.
Oh, good. And, George, I haven't been able to listen to any media at all today. I mean, I don't even bother to try.
Lucky you, Tina.
Yeah. No, I just wait for you to come on, George. And all my family love you.
Thank you.
And so does Tim as well, and everyone else. And follow Sputnik and everything. And it really, really is the University of the Airways, and it's a free space. And it's a much valued space, so thank you.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed having Richard Bergam on tonight as well.
He's good, isn't he? He's really good.
He's great. We really need Jeremy Corbyn to come on.
Yeah, but, Bergam speaks to the North. He speaks to the working class. He's definitely a coming man if the Labour Party has any sense at all.
Yeah, I've seen him on a few occasions, George, on the trail.
He's
unflinching,
unmovable, and bang on the money in terms of the political future.
And he was at the Fidel Castro Memorial as well, there speaking, which was great to see as well.
Well, I don't know him very well, but I knew his uncle very well. I served in Parliament with his uncle, Colin Bergam, and that's how I know he comes from good stock.
Oh, good, yeah. What I was phoning about as well, George, was that there was a Guardian journalist. I only ignore them now, but sometimes they crop up on Facebook. And one of them had put up a visual report of what was wrong with Stoke. This was a few days ago. And, I was surprised at the conditions of the place, very run down, very, very deprived.
Yeah, Labour abandoned it for 20 years.
Yeah. Well, he was
believed,
doing a report.
And believed, by the way, Tina, that the people would go on voting for them irregardless.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, George. It's that the journalist from The Guardian was there doing a clip now, all of a sudden, now that Jeremy Corbyn's the leader. Why wasn't he there doing a report on what Tristram Hunt? I mean, what the hell was Tristram Hunt doing in Stoke, asking people to aspire to be Waitrose shoppers?
Exactly. When there isn't even a Waitrose in the city. There isn't
even a Waitrose there. That's what's wrong with Stoke, the fact that we've had the likes of Tristram Hunt there, and that's what's wrong with Copeland, is that we've had Jamie Reid there. So, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, he's getting out and about. I saw today that he's going to be on the NHS demo on the 4th of March, and wherever I've been, I always see him, and I really like him, actually, just the way he is. But I do understand what you're saying a bit more about him,
Well, it's my view. It's my view, and I'm getting some stick on this. It's my view that a Labour leader needs to look like what the Labour voters think a Prime Minister looks like. And the best I can give you is Jim Callaghan, who admittedly was a friend of mine, and who was defeated by Margaret Thatcher, even though he was much more popular than Margaret Thatcher. The Labour leader needs to look and sound like a Prime Minister in waiting. He cannot look and sound like a student union leader or a guy on a protest. That is a key point that too many people haven't yet grasped, Tina, and I'm getting stick on Twitter right now for saying it, because first impressions are really important in life. If somebody comes to you for a job, or somebody comes to you asking you to make them Prime Minister, they have to be immediately impressed by how you look and how you sound, and above all, what you're actually saying. Okay, I'm looking at it now from the Canary, my favourite every morning read. Woman with no hands had her benefits stopped because she couldn't open a letter. And there is a heart-rending picture of the said woman with no hands, but cuddling her very young baby. The Department for working pensions has stopped a woman's benefit for not attending an appointment, even though she couldn't open the letter informing her of the appointment because she has no hands. A house fire severely injured Tina Leslie as a baby. It left her with life-changing disabilities and having to live without the use of her hands. Now, I could go on, but the idea that a woman with no hands needs an appointment to confirm that she's not fit for work and therefore should not be sanctioned is a monstrosity. It is a deeply repugnant, obscene monstrosity. And that's the Britain that we are living in. Aaron Bastani is the co-founder of Novara Media. He's a Jeremy Corbyn supporter, even more gung-ho a Corbyn supporter than me. So let's hear his take on what happened last night. Aaron, welcome back.
Evening, George.
What would you say, in summary, about the events that we learned of about 3 or 3:30 a.m. this morning?
Yeah, it was early, wasn't it? Well, obviously Stoke is an achievement. Don't let the media kid you. Many of them were saying 3 months ago that Labour faced a real challenge from UKIP. John Harris was saying it could be Corbyn's Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
Dan Jarvis...
Almost as if he hoped it would be, Aaron.
Well, I thought that was the case. Maybe I'm being unfair, but yeah, that's what I thought was the case. Dan Jarvis, Frank Field, Labour MPs thought that Paul Nuttall being UKIP leader meant Labour would see a few upsets in the north, and that hasn't happened. And the media would now, they'll just happily brush that to one side. So that's great news. Congratulations to everyone involved in Stoke-on-Trent Central. Copeland isn't good because, obviously governments don't win by-elections. There are some locally specific factors, nuclear, Sellafield, Corbyn's associations with nuclear not being positive for Copeland voters. It was a small majority, 2,000. It's a big constituency, so difficult to have a good ground game with volunteers, which is obviously Labour's bet with momentum and Corbyn. But the thing that ties the two together is basically the, not free fall, but the demise of UKIP. So in Stoke it meant that, an okay Labour candidate, Gareth Snell, could prevail. And in Copeland it meant, the Tories could pick up a couple of thousand UKIP votes. And the challenge for Labour now is people can talk about Corbyn, they can say about electability or competence. These are returning Tory voters. The UKIP party, UK Independence Party, got 4 million votes in the last general election, the vast majority of which will have quote-unquote conservative values, traditional values, are Eurosceptics. And Labour, whoever leads them, has a massive challenge in that climate. The UK Independence Party and the Tories got 50% of the vote at the last election.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. I agree with all of that. Is another coup coming?
I don't think so. Only one. I'm actually surprised at how few MPs have criticised Corbyn. It was just John Woodcock, wasn't it? Everybody else has kept quiet. So
I suppose he's the default position now that Reid has left Parliament. He's the rent-a-gob.
That's it, right? He absolutely is the rent-a-gob. I think if they'd lost Stoke, if Labour, or we, I should say, if we'd lost Stoke, I think there would have been more people calling him for to resign, and with justification, because UKIP winning a Labour seat finally after 10 years of bluster would have been big, but it hasn't happened. Is another coup coming? I don't think so. There's not the appetite among the membership. There's not the appetite amongst the Parliamentary Labour Party, and I think even somebody as wood-headed as John Woodcock would recognise that the electorate looks on internal fighting and perennial leadership elections very, very poorly. In their mind, it is one and the same as incompetence and unelectability.
Well, one consolation, though it's a bitter one to swallow, especially for those who need a Labour government, is that on the current opinion polls, a very large number, many scores, maybe even more than 100, of these people who have sat behind Jeremy Corbyn, knifing him in the back, over the last year and a half, will themselves lose their seats. How low does Labour have to fall in the public opinion polls for Jeremy Corbyn himself to conclude that he's not going to win and he should make way for someone else?
Well, I think he would have to be presented with a candidate and a roadmap which suggested that they could do significantly better than Jeremy Corbyn. And I am a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. I believe in the project, and I think it's bigger than one person. And quite frankly, that doesn't exist. It does not exist in the Parliamentary Labour Party. People can talk up Clive Lewis. I like Clive Lewis, but he's only been an MP for 1 year. Nobody knows how tough this guy is. Ask Paul Nuttall. Politics, and you know this, George, politics is a tough old game. And there are no proven fighters in the Parliamentary Labour Party with the requisite politics, the requisite personality to do this. And it's bigger than one person anyway. And I think even Corbyn's most ardent critics must understand that by now.
One of the things that the British media never tells us, though they are forever obsessed by European matters, is that every socialist or social democratic party in the entire continent of Europe, arguably in the entire world, has less support in their country than even post-Copeland the Labour Party in Britain has.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I just say to your listeners, go on Wikipedia, look at Copeland, look at Stoke-on-Trent, look at the Labour majorities in these seats for the last 20 years. They're going down every time. And the reason why Corbyn is leading this party, the reason why he's the leader of Her Majesty's opposition, is because Labour has huge structural issues. And they're now being buttressed by this major factor, like I say, of UKIP floundering, which will only come to the assistance of Theresa May. She'll be polling 40%, high 30s for a long time. I don't think she'll get them in general election, by the way, but that's what she'll be polling. And those issues are much bigger than Jeremy Corbyn. So the reason why I support the guy is because in response, Labour needs to become a mass membership organisation. It needs to have 1 million members. It needs to engage them. They need to be the broadcasting technology, if you want, that spreads the message of building an economy to the many, not the few, in pubs, in workplaces, at family tables. And that's the only way Labour, with any leader, are going to get anywhere. And right now, I think Corbyn is unique in being able to continue that project and develop it.
Let's face a couple of uncomfortable facts. The Tories are not hated in Britain to the extent that people like you and me would like them to be, maybe even imagined them to be. That's obvious. Their vote went up 2.2% in Stoke Central, where they hadn't been given a prayer of hope, where one might have expected their vote to collapse. It went up, and they won Copeland. I agree with everything you said about its marginality over decades, actually. Even Jack Cunningham, one of the grandees of Labour politics, scraped home in one of the elections, 92 I think, with about 1,000 or 1,400 of a majority. But the Tories won it. Their vote went up in Copeland. Theresa May is not hated.
No, she's quite liked. What's interesting is how quickly things have changed since 2011. You had a demonstration in London, 500,000 people. You had the pasty tax a year later. And I think that George Osborne, David Cameron were genuinely disliked because of their class background, because they were widely viewed as being born with a silver spoon in their mouth. That's not the case with Theresa May. And people like me, people like you as well, I'm sure you've done it as well, George, the idea of the Tories having a working class resurgence in the north of England, I found completely bizarre. I thought it would never happen. And now, with victory for the Tories in Copeland, and look, Stoke as well, the combined vote of UKIP and the Tories in Stoke is higher than the Labour vote, which is a problem, because if UKIP disappear, the Tories are going to be looking at that and saying, we can get this. So working class Toryism is returning. I never thought I would say that. Maybe it's temporary. Theresa May will bring back a terrible deal in 2 years' time. Will that affect her ratings? Absolutely. But to the extent where she's no longer going to form a majority government, I can't see that. And it's a remarkable turn of events, because the Tories didn't get a majority from 1992 until 2010. And that's just really turned 180 degrees in the last 6 months, really. Last 18 months, obviously, but the last 6 months has been cemented.
Aaron Bastani, a pleasure as always to talk to you, co-founder of Novara Media. And here is Asif in Surrey on the line. Go ahead, Asif.
Hi, George. I just really wanted to highlight something you said earlier about where are the hundreds of thousands of people who joined the Labour Party, who supported Corbyn, why aren't they campaigning in Copeland and Stoke?
Nobody's answered that yet.
No, I have a confession to make. I'm one of those people. I joined the Labour Party actually following your advice. I support you, really.
Thank you.
And I joined Corbyn, Labour, to support Corbyn, who I've met, and I think is a great man. I think would be a great Prime Minister, but being a keyboard warrior is not enough. Smugly voting, electronic voting is not enough. And,
it really isn't, and it's good of you to make what you call a confession. It's a very honest statement, and it's true of hundreds of thousands of people. Of course, social media is important, but it's not as important as meeting people face to face, in the street, at their door, at the shopping centre, in the middle of a real campaign. To a very large extent, social media is a mile wide but an inch deep. And it's far too easy for people to imagine that they're a political activist because they're clicking something on Facebook or on Twitter. Now, the vast...
Agreed.
Let me tell you, let me confess something to you, Asif. I sometimes think, blimey, I've had a good night on Twitter tonight. Look how much retweeting's going on of what I have to say. And then I go to check how many people retweeted it. And the impression before I click it is thousands, but it's almost always hundreds. It's very rarely thousands. And it's crucial that we don't confuse the hundreds with thousands and the thousands with millions, and that we don't confuse the first month of pregnancy with the 9th month of pregnancy. And a lot of us, including me, have got to relearn that lesson all over again. Over to you, Asif.
I agree. If I can point at your example, because I followed your career in detail. When you first won Bradford, you did it by walking the streets.
Yeah.
And the second election, you had the whole mainstream media against you, so you had so many mitigating factors.
Not just the mainstream media, my dear. One day I'll write about it.
No, I know, Baradery and all the rest of it, I'm afraid, and sectarian politics, which is disgusting. But, you were doing, talks in halls and things like that, preaching to the converted, which Corbyn is doing now. And unfortunately, the converted are not what we should be reaching out to. It's the unconverted. I thought I was supporting you by answering comments on the Guardian website, but as you said, it's a liberal hothouse. It's nothing. Everyone ignores it.
Exactly. It's not the real world.
It's not the real world. I thought it was. So, for example, I tried highlighting when they attacked you in the Guardian relentlessly. I tried to highlight what you did at Bradford, what you tried to do in Bradford. You tried to do a Bradford First for education, like you had witnessed in East London. You had tried to save the National Media Museum there. You did so many initiatives for Bradford, completely ignored by the mainstream media, just as Corbyn is ignored now. And they only focus on any tiny negative or perceived negative on you, just the way that they attack Corbyn now. He was wearing a good suit. He was wearing a good suit today. He was wearing ironically.
I didn't see him. Well, look, all of that I'm deeply grateful for, Asif. Let me just make, though, one other point to you. I know what a big campaign is like. In the Bradford by-election in 2012, I started out with 2 other people and finished up with 1,000 people on the streets. I know what 1,000 people on the streets looks like. And I didn't have the benefit of 650,000 members in my party. If there had been not 1,000, but 10,000 Labour activists on the streets of these 2 constituencies, trust me, the result would have been much better. But there wasn't, because I've seen the pictures. And I know that people take a picture to make the crowd look as big as possible. And if that is as big as possible, then these 2 campaigns were just not up to the mark. Asif, thanks for the call, dear brother. David is in Glasgow. Go ahead, David.
Hello, George. Hi. I'm also a supporter of yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
As you know, I agree with most of the things that you stand for. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But obviously, I don't agree with the independence. But we're not going to speak about independence. But most of the things I do respect you and I support you.
But by the way, David, David, let me stop you. I'm in favour of a new independence referendum, and Labour has made a big mistake if it decides this weekend to set its face against a new referendum. The Scottish people are entitled to a referendum anytime they want one, and the only way you can express that or measure that is a decision of the Scottish Parliament. And so if the Scottish Parliament votes for a new independence referendum, they must have one. So there you go. There's a bit of common ground.
George, like the year I was born, you signed the Scottish Claim of Right. I know where you stand. You're not an enemy of Scotland. You're not against Scotland. Do you understand? I don't look at a unionist like yourself and think you're against Scotland. You just believe that Scotland's best place is in the Union. Mm-hmm. And fair play to you. But I don't. That's the thing. But you're not anti-Scottish. You understand? I know some people may regard you as anti-Scottish, but I don't. But I want to speak about the Labour.
Yeah.
Right? I looked at that vote last night differently. Right? I actually seen Labour won last night. Right? More people voted for Labour in those two by-elections combined than Conservatives. Over 500. Labour got 19,500 votes. The Conservatives got 18,900 votes last night. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And
good point.
Labour won a seat, right, and came second in another seat, whereas the Conservatives won a seat and came third. So if you're looking at it as a pedestal, right, Labour got one gold medal and one silver, whereas the Conservatives got one gold medal and one bronze medal. Right?
You're the first person to make these points in the entire country, and they're very good ones.
Well, see, that's because of UKIP. See, the next general election, I think Labour is going to win it. Well, they're going to be the most party because of UKIP, and the Conservatives are going to be fighting amongst themselves. Do you understand? I don't think Labour might be a majority government, but I think that they might actually, because of the UKIP and the Conservatives, they actually might get into become the biggest party in England. I think the SNP will take Scotland again. That's my opinions on that.
Well, your opinions are always welcome, and on this occasion, you taught me something I didn't know, and I'm really grateful for that, David.
No problem. I'll speak to you later on, pal.
All the best, pal. Thanks very much. That was David in Glasgow. Kenneth Denny says on Twitter, Corbyn can wear what he likes. It will not help his delivery on any level. Medina Mines says, didn't do Sanders much good, needs a serious economic plan, one that's realistic and fair. Well, I don't know how you can say it didn't do Sanders any good. He raised scores of millions of pounds, he got millions of votes, and would have been the Democratic Party candidate if he hadn't been cheated by, as Damien pointed out, the equivalent of Labour's NEC, in this case the Democrats' DNC in the United States, who cheated him out of the nomination in order that they could put forward Hillary Clinton, who spent $1 billion losing to Donald Trump. Now, Salman Khan says it's easy to blame Corbyn for the loss of Copeland, especially when you're a conniving Blairite. Very good. Alan McHugh, 64, says too many promoted ex-political advisors as MPs, not enough ex-trade union shop stewards in the Parliamentary Labour Party. Let's hear from Martin in Doncaster. Go ahead, Martin.
Hello, George. Well, I'm feeling quite perplexed with the latest developments in the never-ending virulent media campaign against Jeremy Corbyn, particularly spearheaded by the BBC and The Guardian.
Yep.
And I think today it reached new heights in that this character called Norman Smith actually, I think, was virtually guilty of assault on Jeremy Corbyn.
Really? What happened?
Well, he basically roared into his face, are you going to resign? And Jeremy Corbyn responded, well, I think you're an example that demonstrates to me that the media don't even like themselves. So, but anyway, he continued, and I haven't seen the pictures because this was on the radio, but it sounds to me like he was virtually guilty of assault, and he's got previous on this. is one of the most virulent and one of the most nasty piece of work that the BBC produce, and that's saying something, isn't it, really?
It is, yeah. Well, I mean, you may have seen the video on YouTube of how I deal with these people.
Yes.
And I recommend it to Jeremy Corbyn. The important thing is to do, as Trump is successfully doing, in saying that your views, or let me put it a different way, a more colloquial way.
Yeah.
You're confusing me with somebody who gives a you-know-what about what you think.
Well,
That's the attitude to take to these people.
He sort of said that, didn't he? In that he responded that you proved to me that the media don't even like themselves.
Very good. It's a very good line, that.
Yeah, and I think your example of Trump is tremendous, because whatever else you can say about him, I mean, I'm from the exact political perspective as you are yourself, I believe, but he's demonstrating that in such the most mighty nation on earth, the most mighty establishment, military, political, and also the Secret Service, you can actually fight against it, can't you?
Yes, you can.
So he's an example.
But you have to be bold. I was explaining to my eldest son, aged 9, just a few days ago, that my motto has always been that of the French revolutionary Danton.
Yes.
His motto was l'audace, toujours l'audace, encore l'audace, toujours l'audace. Audacity, again audacity, always audacity. You have to be audacious. You can't be a shrinking violet. You must take it to them. Stick it to them.
Jeremy's going to have to, as you say, man up, isn't he, a little bit?
Well, I wouldn't say man up, because that's too macho, and Jeremy's definitely a man. But he is too polite, too nice. That's the reason how he got to be the leader in the first place.
Yes,
that's how he got the nominations that somebody less nice, like me, could never have got. But it's a real limitation once you get the leadership.
And one other point, George, and I think this is part of their aim, and I think this is part of their agenda. What's becoming lost in all this blitz of bombardment against Jeremy Corbyn and any chance he has of being successful, it's completely gone off the agenda. No one is noticing that, it should be gone by now, shouldn't it, neoliberalism, but it's from 1979 onwards, but it's actually still there, and is actually being replaced.
Yeah, it's still there. I'm reading a wonderful book at the moment. I think I'm going to get the author on next week, which deals with the devastation caused by this neoliberalism from 1979 onwards.
Indeed.
The Thatcher Reaganomics.
Yeah, and the nice...
and we're still suffering from it today.
Absolutely, and despite the nice exterior that Theresa May is portraying, she's actually responsible this week for 2 more extreme measures than even Cameron and Osborne. Have you noticed these?
Tell me.
Right, they've extended the right to buy, unbelievably, to the arm's length housing arms of councils. That was the last loophole they had that was allowing them to remain, build a remaining few council houses that they are able to do.
My goodness, I didn't know that. When did that happen?
Also, today, yesterday, the High Court ruled that 3 million, it might be 500,000 people, are entitled to the higher rate of DLA or PIPs. So they've passed a midnight measure overruling that possibility that these people can now get the higher rate of DLA or PIP.
Wow. Martin, a pleasure, as always, to hear from you. Martin in Doncaster. Go ahead, Robert.
Hello, George. I think I've told you before that I'm sort of notionally on the right of the party.
Yes, yes, we've spoken, yes.
Yes, so to catch this, I do feel that when I look at Corbyn, whereas in regards to you, although you're on the left, when you talk about sort of the issues that matter, there's a lot of a correlation between sort of the old Labour right and the left that can be seen.
Yeah, well, that conflation was once standard. So that's how I could have had a close relationship with Harold Wilson, James Callaghan, and John Smith, even though they were on the right and I was on the left.
Yeah, and Labour, particularly the left, and I think it's far too complacent left, not so much you, but in regards to other regards, and I think Corbyn can be criticised of this, is that vegan, for example, puts the fact that be a bit more meaty. So instead of putting forward almost as if I think you're really talking about identity politics in regards to
I am, yeah.
Yeah, you're ready for, but in regards to identity politics, about the fact that transgender rights, for example, as one such issue.
Well, who should be allowed to go to a girl's toilet? A man who says, who knows, he's in transition to becoming a woman has the right to go to a woman's toilet. My wife doesn't want a man, even in transition, in a woman's toilet next to her, and neither do I want my daughter to experience that. Maybe that makes me socially conservative. But the one thing I'm certain of, Robert, is that nobody in Copeland gives a toss about that issue.
Precisely. So you've got an issue where so many people on the left are like, we can build a party with people like the Greens and Lib Dems. We need to build, what Labour needs to do is rebuild its base with working class voters. There was a poll out this week which is damning because firstly it shows that Corbyn's cut through. He has 94% of people know him. They don't like what they see. And more critically, although this isn't just about him, but it's been a long-standing trend, Labour is now in third place amongst working class voters. It's polling very badly amongst working class voters. Working class voters would now rather vote UKIP or Conservative than Labour. That's a shame, whatever way you put it. Whatever way you spin it, whatever way... of course, it's not just linked to Corbyn, but he's amplifying it even more by not talking about the sort of bread and butter socialism that Richard Bergen talks about, or Angela Rayner talks about, or that you talk about, rather than being more animated than, let's say, something bad that Aaron Banks said, rather than raising real-life issues like pensions and people's money. You raised a good point earlier on about people in Copeland care about the nuclear industry and the jobs, nuclear plant being shut down. Mm-hmm. That's something that actually matters to people. Talking about the NHS, Labour cannot be a one-trick pony.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And there's a number of other aspects to that, Robert. First of all, it is, for most people at any one time, an abstract issue, because most people are not in hospital at any one time. Most people, won't go to a maternity hospital 40 miles up the road, may not even have a daughter who will have to do so. So it can become just something that makes us feel good talking about, because it's Labour's greatest achievement. I would argue Britain's greatest achievement. We think that if we just keep rubbing our hands and saying it like an abracadabra, that it translates into votes. But in Copeland, it didn't.
And there's a lot of other seats that can happen to if we don't start talking about the sort of bread and butter issues that matter to people. Everybody cares about money at the end of the day, and people care about their jobs, about having a home they can live in. That's the sort of stuff we should be talking about rather than dreaming up.
It's the economy is stupid, as Clinton said. It is the economy. It's not just about money, because it's not the price of everything, the value of nothing, but it's about your whole lived experience. It's about the public realm and your private prosperity. And Labour has to, I mentioned it earlier, you'll not be a fan of the Bolsheviks, but the simple slogan of peace, land, bread swept the entire country and overthrew a king. They had reduced a revolutionary programme to 3 words. Crikey, Labour hasn't yet reduced its alternative economic programme to 3 volumes.
It should be able to. It should be very easy for him to do it, because he's got a big media. He's actually got a big social media platform to be able to bypass to some degree the sort of hostile media that he undoubtedly has to convey that sort of message. But anyway, there we are.
Well, I like your calls, Robert, and you and I have much more in common than you think. Thanks for that ring. Laura is in Inner London. Let's hear from her. Go ahead, Laura.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I'd like to say 2 things, one about the Tories and one about Labour. With regard to the Tories, I find it an absolute disgrace that the daughter of a clergyman, Theresa May, is allowing all these things to happen with PIP and DLA.
Yeah, it's a paradox, to be sure.
It's an absolute contradiction to the faith that she was raised in by her father.
What would Jesus have to say about the woman with no hands getting cut off the dole because she couldn't open the letter demanding she come to an appointment to prove yet again her childhood debilitation made her unfit for work.
And if they're doing that to that woman with no hands, imagine what they're doing. They're doing that to all sorts of other people who have got other conditions, chronic conditions. But that woman demonstrates that they're doing this to so many people, and that it's being done by the daughter of a religious man, of a clergyman, and I can't wrap my head around that. So shame on her. Yeah, that's that.
Amen.
All I've got to say about
Amen.
that. And then about Labour, I've consistently been voting Labour, and I can't anymore. I certainly won't be voting Tory, not even if you paid me. But I'm at a loss to know who to vote for. The Blairites, to me, are just the same as the Tories. They're so tight in with the multinationals and the corporations and the banks and Big Pharma. They're all corrupt. They all collude. And so I don't know who to vote for anymore.
Well, I mean, you have to choose between bad and worse. There are some Labour MPs and candidates that I could not possibly vote for. But for most of them, I'd say hold your nose and vote for them, because at least you'll be voting to strengthen Jeremy Corbyn. At least you'll not be voting to weaken Jeremy Corbyn.
But
and at least you'll be keeping the Tories out.
Yeah, but if for instance, Keir Starmer was one of those who wanted Jeremy out.
Yes.
And
you're posing me a dilemma, Laura.
Well, so if I were in his area, would I vote for someone like that who wants Jeremy out and who is a Blairite? Or, I mean, what do you do?
Good question, Laura. I have no answer to it. Laughing for G3ZUZ, I have no idea how you pronounce that, says Corbyn just needs a burst of charisma. Jane A says, dread to think what the Dark Knight gets up to the rest of the time, George. I think she means the Dark Lord Mandelson. Peter says, Mr. Galloway, are you listening? The people are screaming for a revolution. Mr. Corbyn has to call the murdering Blairites out, says Peter in Glasgow. I don't frankly think they are screaming for a revolution. If they were, the Tory vote wouldn't have gone up in Stoke Central. Well, just when you thought it was safe to get back in the water, David Miliband is back. In an interview with The Times in the morning, he says Labour at weakest for 50 years, says Miliband. Actually, Labour was quite strong 50 years ago. I was there. 50 years ago, Labour was about to win the general elections of 1964, 1966, and 2 general elections in 1974. The trade unions had 12 million members. Britain was at work, was a manufacturing hub, a cauldron of production from one end of the country to the other, and all cultural roads led to London. But David Miliband doesn't know any of that. Anyway, here's what he says. Former Foreign Secretary blames Corbyn for defeat. Jeremy Corbyn has driven Labour to its worst position in living memory, according to David Miliband. The party is now weaker than in the 1980s and must confront the historic nature of the challenge it faces. Mr. Miliband was speaking after Labour's defeat by the Conservatives in Copeland, the first time since 1982 that a governing party has gained an opposition seat in a by-election. In an interview in The Times, Mr. Miliband, who narrowly lost the 2010 Labour leadership election to the enduring regret of a section of the party, brackets, and The Times, declined to rule out a return to Westminster politics. I'm obviously deeply concerned that Labour is further from power than at any stage in my lifetime. Asked about his future, he added, I honestly don't know what I'm going to do. It's hard to see, but what's the point of saying never? In his interview, Mr. Miliband said that the rise of Emmanuel Macron in the French presidential election campaign showed there was still a market for a pro-European centrist approach. The Macron phenomenon is real. He's built something extraordinary. I don't think the centre-left is ever on the way out globally because it's got a lot to say. Macron is a man who's broken away from the French Socialist Party, whose minister he was, and created effectively a Blairite centre party. So it's interesting that Mr. Miliband is so enthralled by it. Jeff's in London. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hi, George. Thanks very much for taking my call.
Welcome, mate.
I meant to, you just mentioned about Macron. I would say to David Miliband that Britain's already had its Emmanuel Macron, albeit a rather more blood-soaked version of it in Tony Blair.
Exactly so.
And as you were just talking about earlier with your guests, that was the same Blair and same wing of the Labour Party that's actually presided over the sharp decline over the last about 20 years in seats such as Copeland.
Exactly so. 4.4 million votes they lost between 97 and 2010, and half their membership.
They did indeed, and I'll tell you something. There was something else one of your guests said, which I agreed with, which was that imagine, people who are critical of Corbyn. I'm not talking about constructive criticism like you and others, but people who really are against him, they have to offer an alternative. And what are the alternatives?
Yeah,
the challenge to
maybe it's no accident, Jeff, that David Miliband has given this important interview in the Times.
Well, precisely. They're all speaking up now, aren't they? I mean, the last option that they proffered was Owen Smith. Now, thank God we weren't fighting the Stoke by-election under Owen Smith.
That's just a joke, isn't it?
I know, precisely. And I know this isn't quite on topic, but it's something that's been annoying me every week, actually, and I think it might have been annoying you and a lot of your viewers too. And that is, have you noticed at PMQs, Theresa May has been able, and I don't have a problem with it because it's true, to bring up a lot of the bad things, the lack of funding for the NHS and things that Labour were responsible for.
Oh, they can say, why are you attacking us? You started it.
Yes, precisely. I think Jeremy Corbyn has to stand up, and I know he's not doing this probably in the name of party unity, but I think he has to stand up and say, look, that wasn't me, that's my predecessors. I'm a new Labour Party. I mean, it's just, she can't keep blaming, I mean, this isn't Corbyn. It's not Corbyn who's responsible for those things. As a matter of fact, he's castigated as a rebel, as disloyal by the Blairites, because he actually voted against these things.
Exactly so. 500 times they're always telling us. And on every single occasion of the 500, he was absolutely right to do so.
Yes, and that's why, if they want to talk about that, because they say, oh, well, Corbyn, you can't talk about disloyalty now because, he was disloyal in the past. Well, let's have a good argument and debate about those things in the past, shall we?
Only one point, Jeff. I'd avoid the use of New Labour Party, if you get my drift. Jeff, thanks for the call, as always. Mark in Liverpool is angry with me. That's why he's on next. Go ahead, Marco.
Yeah. Hello, George, mate. You okay?
Yes, good to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks. Listen, I was very angry earlier, but I got called away, and you've sort of brought it back. You sort of reined it in a little bit for me. But I am angry, mate. I'm absolutely shocked with you.
Okay, go on.
What you just said to that girl before when she was like that, you should have voted for, there should have only been one answer from your voice, mate, and that was that you vote for anyone except that Tory party, preferentially for the Labour candidate. End of.
Well, I kind of said that, but I did say that I could not encourage some people. I could not encourage people to vote for some Labour candidates, and that's true. Would you expect me to vote for Tony Blair?
No, but you know what, George? I wouldn't expect you to vote for you. And I'm not just saying that to be funny, because I tell you what, mate, I don't vote for me. If I'll wing through life, no problem whatsoever. I stand on my front step and I look down our streets, I take in what's happening, and that's who I vote for. So I hope other people follow that way. If they don't, Sound. Don't forget, you've got a lot of beef and a lot of personal, and you're a lot more committed to certain issues than I am. But let's get something straight as well. The socialist way has got to change. The manufacturing base of Great Britain was pivotal to the success of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah,
And
but
this
we've
is
got to get
really-
it back. We have to get it back. There's no living for us, Mark, selling ice cream to non-existent tourists. We can't all work on the London Eye.
Yeah, but George, we'll get it back tomorrow if you want. But everyone will be earning £1 an hour. That's the simple fact of the matter.
No, it's not at all. It's not at all. Now that we're out of the EU, we can protect our own industries and we can build them up. And we can require everything in Britain to be made in Britain. We can require every ambulance to be built in Britain, every police car to be built in Britain, every piece of military procurement to be built in Britain, every mile of railway, every railway carriage to be built in Britain. We can prefer our own industries. We can rebuild. And by the way, Made in Britain is still a label to be proud of. It's still a label that can fly. It's still a label that can sell.
Well, George, how can you have any answer back to that? We know that's the perfect idea. That's what we'd all hope we'd strive for. Not all of us, don't forget. There's a lot who wouldn't want to strive for that in the Labour Party. And that's where we're getting to the nitty-gritty. Things have changed, George. We've got to take a stance one side or the other. The last thing I want is for the Labour Party to split. And do you know what? We're walking right into it, mate. Because we might get on, you might have all the beef that you've got with it. Doesn't mean these people aren't valid, mate. And I'll tell you what, the normal layperson, listen to the radio tonight, and where they hear texts from the lads from Glasgow, Scotland, wherever you're from, then the Blair and the maid, whatever. Do you know what, a normal person? Mum, listen to that now, know what you just say, forget it. Can't be bothered. We need to be getting people back into politics and understanding the Labour Party. We need to be moving things on. See that not all? How did that where a Labour politician, a prospective politician, stand up and go on about Hillsborough? Shouldn't have entered the equation from a Labour politician. We could put that man to bed any minute of the day, any day of the week.
Well, that's true, and you're not ahead of me in feeling about the Hillsborough crime. It wasn't a disaster; it was a crime. And it was a crime that was covered up by the establishment. And I'm not in second place to you on that. But here's the unfortunate truth. Labour did nothing about Hillsborough. Nothing about making accountable those responsible for Hillsborough. It was Andy Burnham that done it with courage and eloquence. But all those years that Labour was in power, they did nothing to call to account those responsible for the crime of Hillsborough. Mark, I've got to go. I'll speak to you again next week. Ken is the last caller in Harrow. Go ahead, Ken.
Hi, George. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Right. Firstly, identity politics. This has emanated from the liberal bubble, like those that right.
California. It all started in California.
Indeed. Now, I mean, there's 28 genders on Tumblr, which I recognise, which most people in mining towns and mill towns aren't even going to know of or care
28
about.
genders. I mean, my goodness, that's something I didn't. That's something I didn't know.
You go to a mining town where they're out of jobs, there's heroin problems and all of that. They don't care about it. This is not going to put food in their stomachs. And this is what Trump has done when he went into the Rust Belts. He won. He got people were angry, and he tapped into that, and that's why he just swept it. Corbyn is in a position, if he's savvy, he can do it, but I generally think that he's not going to, because he's just not the savvy type of aggressive politician that perhaps you were when you went to the Senate. I mean, we've all seen the videos when you fought like a corner tiger against them and made the case for the prosecution, but it's just not going to happen over here. And because of it, we've got people that are angry that just can't be bothered to vote. And
I'll tell you what, Ken. I'll tell you what, Ken. You've just put your finger on something that I didn't say earlier, and that nobody else has said. Let's not forget that the great majority of the people in Stoke did not actually vote. We don't know their point of view. And 49% of the people in Copeland didn't vote. The stay-at-home party was actually the main winner last night. And what's needed is a political force to pick up and mobilize and move forward the millions and millions of people who think that the political class and the political system has nothing in it for them. And you know what, Ken? For many decades past now, that has had the benefit of being the truth. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you.